So Republicans did their best to make Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson look bad, but did it work? Let's talk about it in today's video.
I just look at you and I start getting full of emotion. And you did not get there because of some left-wing agenda? You didn't get here because of some dark money groups? You got here how every black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being, like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels. And so I'm just sitting here saying, nobody's stealing my joy. Nobody's going to make me angry, especially not people that are called in a conservative magazine demagogic.
Hi, I'm Mike Reiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So we just saw New Jersey Senator Cory Booker expressing what I think many of us felt through those hearings. Those hearings were a disgusting display of partisan venom, and anyone comparing them with the Kavanaugh hearings must be dreaming, for several reasons. For starters, Kavanaugh was credibly accused. He actually had accusers who were willing to come forward and raise serious concerns about his elevation to the Supreme Court. In fact, back when the hearings were happening, I wrote an article which said that there probably was enough evidence to prosecute him for those crimes if the statute of limitations had not already run. It turns out also that the Trump administration did everything they could to block any kind of further investigation into Kavanaugh's past. So there was a credible allegation there that was being explored. And the Republican members of Congress were all outraged. And in fact, we had to hear from Lindsey Graham at this confirmation hearing, complaining to Ketanji Brown Jackson, asking her about what she thought about the Kavanaugh hearings. Something she had nothing to do with, as Senator Dick Durbin pointed out. But that all comes down to the sense of white male entitlement, where white men like me feel we can do anything without having to bear any responsibility for our actions, that we can be mediocre people and elevated to positions of power simply because of the color of our skin. But as Cory Booker pointed out, that's not what Ketanji Brown Jackson had to do. She is an example of the best of us, the best that America has to produce. She is somebody who literally rose up from a humble background, and through her own courage and hard work was able to rise to one of the most important positions in the world. Truth is, were it not for the color of her skin and the fact that she's got a vagina, Republicans would be falling all over themselves to point to her as an example of the American dream. So I really appreciate Cory Booker standing up and reminding us of that. Because boy, did those Republicans go low and do everything they could to try to besmirch her. But as it turns out, after those hearings, Ketanji Brown Jackson appears to be the most popular nominee to the Supreme Court in the history of the United States. A recent poll from Marquette Law School showed Jackson as having an approval of 66%. That approval breaks down as follows: 95% among Democrats, which makes sense, I certainly approve of her, 67% among independents, and even 29% among Democrats. Don't you think Joe Biden would love to have 29% support among Republicans right now? I mean, following their hearings, Amy Coney Barrett was supported by about half the population, and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch were both in the mid-40s. So in comparison to the nominees of Trump, Ketanji Brown Jackson is a superhero. It appears that the hearings actually accomplished exactly the opposite of what Republicans were seeking to do. They were hoping to besmirch her reputation and paint her as being somebody who is outside of the mainstream. Ironically, Elena Kagan, who was the last Democratic nominee to the Supreme Court, whose hearings were frankly boring, she only had 46% after her hearings. If the Republicans had done nothing, they probably would have been more successful in pushing down her popularity. But Jackson demonstrated such poise and such elegance and such command of the facts. She refused to be rattled by these incredibly personal attacks, quite in contrast, by the way, to Kavanaugh, who threw a temper tantrum. Suddenly these claims about her being some crazy left-winger kind of fell flat. And in fact, I would argue that she's exactly the kind of person who Democrats should be appointed to these positions. We don't need to be getting into the specifics of the attacks against her because you know what? They don't matter, obviously. The public doesn't care. The public took them for what they were, which were partisan efforts to bully her. And she did not take the bait, to her credit. The one issue I do want to address is ironically the one where she agrees to the demands of the Republicans. And that is whether she would recuse herself on the lawsuit against Harvard University, her alma mater, regarding its affirmative action policies. In this case, Jackson agreed that she would recuse herself, despite the fact that she has no personal involvement in that case and never has. I would say this is a non-issue, except for the fact that we're living in an era in which 3 other of the Supreme Court justices all went to Harvard as well, and I'm sure they won't be recusing themselves. What's more is it turns out that all the other Supreme Court justices, except for Amy Coney Barrett, who went to Notre Dame, went to Yale, which follows the exact same policies as Harvard. So are they going to recuse themselves? I think not. But this critique is especially rich in an era where Justice Clarence Thomas refuses to recuse himself from cases regarding the January 6th coup. And yet now we find out that his wife, throughout the coup, was texting with the White House chief of staff, encouraging him to support Donald Trump in his effort to hold on to office despite what the election said. In actuality, it's even more disturbing, this relationship that Clarence Thomas and his wife have with respect to his position on the court. Because again, unlike Ketanji Brown Jackson or Elena Kagan, who frequently recused herself from cases that she handled while she was Solicitor General at the White House, his wife actually is a lobbyist and a conservative activist who makes money working on certain causes. And at the same time, these causes are coming before the Supreme Court, and he's making decisions on things that she essentially is able to sell his influence for. That is a blatant conflict of interest, a personal conflict of interest, and it's exactly the type of thing that should lead to recusal. And yet Mitch McConnell, who says that Ketanji Brown Jackson should recuse herself from the Harvard case, doesn't see anything wrong with Clarence Thomas ruling on those cases. Now, I've actually been raising this alarm about Clarence Thomas and his wife's conflict of interest for a number of years. So I'm glad to see this is finally coming to the attention of people. We'll see what actually happens. But the bottom line is that Ketanji Brown Jackson is an incredibly qualified individual, and as it turns out, an incredibly popular Supreme Court nominee. And we as Democrats should be proud of the fact that President Biden is nominating people like that. I think it's important to note, by the way, that her nomination probably would have been doomed if Joe Manchin had decided he was going to vote against her. I mean, yes, since then Susan Collins had said she'd support the nomination, but something tells me she wouldn't have necessarily come on board if it wasn't already clear that she was going to win. So that leads to kind of the fraught relationship that we as Democrats have with Joe Manchin. I've talked about that before, so why don't you check out this other video where I discuss the various conflicts of interest in the damage that Joe Manchin has done to the Democratic Party as a whole. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.